Tonight, we are going to move closer to the ground, away from the wide sky, away from the clouds and falling rain, down to the shaded places beneath trees, the surfaces of old stones, the bark of quiet trunks, the damp edges of paths, and the soft green worlds that often go unnoticed. This is the hidden world of moss and lichens. It is a world without flowers, without tall stems, without bright petals, without the obvious movement of animals, and yet it is alive in many different ways. Moss can cover a stone like a small forest. Lichens can paint pale shapes across bark and rock. Together, they soften hard surfaces, hold moisture, shelter tiny organisms, and slowly change the places where they grow. They are easy to overlook because they are small. They do not call attention to themselves. They do not rise above the forest. They do not bloom loudly. They do not move quickly, but they are among the quiet workers of the living world. Mosses are ancient land plants with simple bodies and a deep connection to water. They do not have true roots, like trees or grasses. They do not carry water through long woody trunks. Instead, they live close to the surface, absorbing moisture from the air and from the places they touch. Lichens are different. A lichen is not one organism in the simple sense. It is a partnership. Usually, it is a fungus living together with an algae or a cyanobacterium. The fungus gives structure and protection. The photosynthetic partner makes sugars from light. Together, they form a living crust, leaf-like patch, or branching shape that can survive on stone, bark, soil, and even bare exposed places. Moss and lichens often appear together, but they are not the same. Moss is a plant. Lichen is a symbiotic living system. Moss is usually soft and green. Lichens can be pale, gray, yellow, orange, green, blue-green, black, or white. Moss often grows in cushions, carpets, tufts, and mats. Lichens may grow as crusts tightly attached to rock, as leafy forms with small lobes, or as tiny branching structures like miniature shrubs. Both can seem still, but stillness is not emptiness. Inside a patch of moss, water moves between tiny leaves. Spores develop in small capsules. Cells respond to light and moisture. Small animals may crawl between the stems. Microbes live in the damp spaces. Inside a lichen, fungal threads wrap around photosynthetic cells. Sugars are made. Minerals are slowly gathered. Pigments protect against light. The living partnership adjusts to dryness, cold, and exposure. These organisms are patient. Some mosses can dry out and later revive when water returns. Some lichens can survive extreme conditions that would damage many other forms of life. They may grow slowly on rocks, roofs, walls, branches, and old soil. They may remain in place for years, sometimes for decades, sometimes longer. Their timescale is not the timescale of a rushing animal or a flowering meadow. It is closer to the timescale of weathering stone, of moisture returning, of shade shifting through seasons, of small changes gathering over time. In this calm journey, we will look closely at what moss really is, how it lives without true roots, how it reproduces with spores, how lichens form through biological partnership, why these organisms can live on bark, stone, and soil, how they survive drying, how they create tiny habitats, and how they help begin some of the slowest transformations in nature. You do not need to remember every term. You do not need to follow every detail. You can simply listen, rest, and let this small green world open slowly in the background. Imagine a stone after rain. Its surface is dark. The air is cool. A thin layer of moss holds droplets like tiny glass beads. Nearby, a pale lichen spreads across bark in quiet circular patches. Nothing seems to be happening, but the surface is alive. Water is being held. Light is being used. Spores are waiting. Minerals are being touched. Tiny organisms are moving through spaces too small for us to notice. The forest is not only made of trees, it is also made of the small worlds beneath them. And tonight, we will begin there, at the level of stones, bark, moisture, and green silence. Moss is often described as simple, but simple does not mean unimportant, and simple does not mean primitive in the careless sense. Mosses are living plants with their own structure, their own life cycle, and their own way of solving the problem of living on land. They belong to a group of plants, often called bryophytes. Bryophytes include mosses, liverworts, and hornworts. These are small, non-vascular land plants. The word non-vascular is important. Most familiar plants, such as trees, grasses, ferns, and flowering plants, have vascular tissues. These tissues move water, minerals, and sugars through the plant body. Xylem carries water and minerals. Phloem carries sugars and other products of photosynthesis. Together, these tissues allow plants to grow tall, move materials over long distances, and support complex bodies with roots, stems, leaves, branches, flowers, fruits, and seeds. Mosses do not have true vascular tissue in the same way. They do not have wood, they do not have deep roots. They do not have flowers, they do not make seeds, they do not grow into tall trunks or broad canopies. Instead, they remain small and close to the surfaces where they live. This smallness is not a failure, it is part of their design. A moss lives near water, near stone, near bark, near soil, near the thin, damp boundary between air and surface. It does not lift water meters into the sky like a tree. It does not need to. It spreads low. It absorbs moisture across its body. It waits for wet conditions. It slows down when dry, and it begins again when water returns. When you look closely at moss, you may see tiny green shoots. These shoots can look like miniature stems with tiny leaves. In everyday language, people often call them stems and leaves. But botanically, moss structures are not exactly the same as the true stems and leaves of vascular plants. They are leaf-like and stem-like structures. They can photosynthesize, they can hold water, they can create a miniature canopy, but they lack the same internal vascular organization found in more complex plants. This is one reason mosses usually stay low. Without strong vascular tissues and woody support, they cannot easily grow tall. Their world is small, but it is not empty. A patch of moss may look like a green carpet from above, but at close range, it is more like a miniature forest. Tiny shoots stand close together. Small leaf-like structures overlap. Spaces between them hold moisture. Light filters through the upper layer. Air moves slowly inside the mat. Small organisms may travel between the shoots. The moss creates a habitat by being small and dense. Mosses anchor themselves with structures called rhizoids. Rhizoids are not true roots. They do not absorb water and minerals in the same way that the roots of flowering plants do. Their main function is anchoring. They help the moss hold onto a surface, a stone, a log, soil bark, a roof tile, a wall. Rhizoids can look root-like, but they are simpler. They may be made of one cell or many cells, depending on the moss. They attach rather than deeply feed. This difference matters. A tree root explores soil. It branches. It absorbs water and minerals through root hairs. It connects to vascular tissues that carry water upward. A moss rhizoid mostly holds the moss in place. The moss absorbs much of its water directly across its surface, through its leaf-like structures, through its outer cells, through capillary spaces in the moss mat. This close contact with the environment makes moss very responsive to moisture. When the air is wet, moss may become soft, green, and active. When the air is dry, many mosses can lose water and become curled, dull, or brittle-looking. Then, when rain returns, they can rehydrate. The leaves spread, the color deepens. Photosynthesis resumes. Moss often lives in pulses, wet and active, dry and paused, wet and active again. This ability is one of the reasons mosses are so successful in places where water comes and goes. Forest floors, rock surfaces, tree bark, roofs, walls, wetlands, tundra, mountain slopes, stream edges. Mosses are not all the same. There are thousands of moss species. Some form soft cushions, some form carpets, some grow in upright tufts, some creep across surfaces, some live in wetlands, some tolerate dry rock, some live in cold places, some live in forests, some grow in disturbed soil, some are tiny and easily missed. Others form thick mats that shape entire landscapes. The word moss is a common word for many species with different forms and ecological roles, but they share some basic features. They are small land plants. They do not produce flowers or seeds. They reproduce by spores. They usually need water for sexual reproduction, and their life cycle is different from the life cycle of flowering plants. This life cycle is one of the most interesting parts of moss biology. To understand it, we need to introduce two phases, gametophyte and sporophyte. All land plants have these two phases in their life cycle, but in different plant groups, one phase is more dominant. In flowering plants, the sporophyte is dominant. The visible plant, The tree, the grass, the flower is the sporophyte generation. The gametophyte is tiny and reduced. In mosses, the opposite is true. The green moss plant that we usually notice is the gametophyte. This is the dominant phase. It is the main visible body of the moss. The gametophyte produces gametes, which are reproductive cells. Male structures produce sperm. Female structures produce eggs. For fertilization to happen, moss sperm usually need a film of water. They swim through water to reach the egg. This is a key reason mosses are so connected to moisture. They can live through dry periods, but sexual reproduction often depends on water. Rain, dew, mist, or a thin surface film can make reproduction possible. After fertilization, a new sporophyte grows from the female gametophyte. The sporophyte remains attached to the gametophyte. It often appears as a slender stalk with a capsule at the top. Inside the capsule, spores are produced. When the spores mature, they can be released into the air. Wind may carry them away. If a spore lands in a suitable place, it can germinate. It may grow into a thin, branching filament or sheet called a protonema. The protonema is an early stage of moss development. From it, small buds can form. These buds grow into new leafy gametophytes. A new patch of moss begins. So the life cycle moves through spores, protonema, gametophyte, gametes, fertilization, sporophyte, capsule, and spores again. This is not the same as a seed plant. There is no flower. No pollen in the usual flowering plant sense. No seed, no fruit. Moss uses spores and water-assisted reproduction. It belongs to an older style of plant life on land. Older does not mean worse. It means mosses represent one of the early solutions to living outside water. They show us a form of plant life that remains tied to wet surfaces, thin films of water, and small-scale habitats. This connection to water helps explain why moss often appears where moisture lingers. On the north side of stones in some regions, in shaded forest floors, on decaying logs, along streams, in bogs and wetlands, in cracks where water collects. But moss can also be surprisingly resilient. Some species can tolerate drying. Some can survive freezing. Some can live in exposed places by shutting down activity when conditions are harsh. They do not escape stress by moving. They endure it by changing their metabolism. When conditions are dry, some mosses become dormant or nearly inactive. When water returns, they revive. This is very different from plants that rely on continuous water transport through roots and vascular tissues. Moss lives closer to the rhythm of the surface. A little rain can change it quickly. A foggy morning can refresh it. A shaded stone can hold enough moisture to support it. This makes moss a good listener to small environmental changes. It responds to humidity, to light, to shade, to surface texture, to temperature, to the chemistry of the place where it grows. Moss is sometimes confused with algae. This is understandable because both can be green, small, and associated with damp places. But moss and algae are different. Moss is a land plant. It has a multicellular body with leaf-like shoots, rhizoids, and a life cycle involving embryos and spores. Algae are a diverse group of mostly aquatic or moisture-loving photosynthetic organisms. Some algae are some are multicellular. They do not have the same land plant structure as moss. Moss is also often confused with lichen, but lichen is not a moss. Lichen is a symbiotic system, usually involving a fungus and a photosynthetic partner. Moss is a plant. Lichen is a partnership. They may grow side by side on the same stone, but biologically, they are very different. Moss is usually soft, green, and leafy at close range. Lichen may be crusty, powdery, leafy, or branching. Moss often forms mats or cushions. Lichen may form flat patches, scales, lobes, or tiny shrubs. Knowing the difference changes the way we see a rock or a tree trunk. What first looked like one green surface may actually be several living forms. Moss, lichen, algae, fungi, bacteria, tiny animals, each occupying its own part of a small landscape. Moss also differs from ferns. Ferns are vascular plants. They have true roots, stems, and leaves. They reproduce by spores, like mosses, but their visible body is the sporophyte generation. Ferns can grow larger because they have vascular tissue. Mosses remain smaller and gametophyte dominant. So moss is not just a tiny fern, it is a different branch of plant life. a different architecture, a different life cycle, a different relationship with water. This is the central idea of this scene. Moss is not merely green fuzz. It is a small, non-vascular plant with a distinctive biology. It anchors with rhizoids. It absorbs water across its body. It reproduces by spores. It has a dominant gametophyte generation. It often depends on water for fertilization. It can form dense mats that hold moisture and create habitat. And it lives close to the surfaces of the world. The scale is small, but the biology is complete. A moss cushion on a stone contains structure, reproduction, chemistry, water movement, photosynthesis, and ecological relationships. It is the plant body built for a low, damp, patient life. When rain falls on moss, the water does not simply run away. Some of it is caught between tiny shoots. Some clings to leaf-like surfaces. Some enters the spaces of the mat. The moss becomes greener. Cells rehydrate. Photosynthesis can increase. The small plant resumes its quiet work. This is why moss often seems to come alive after rain. It was alive before, but water changes its visible state. Dry moss may look dull and closed. Wet moss may look bright, open, and soft. The difference is water. The same theme that guided our first journey through rain continues here, close to the ground. Water shapes the life of moss, not from far above, but in thin films, droplets, and damp spaces. To understand moss, we need to understand this relationship with water, and in the next scene, we will look more closely at how moss lives without true roots, how it holds on, absorbs moisture, and survives so close to the surface. Moss lives without true roots. This may seem strange at first, because roots are one of the most familiar parts of plants. When we imagine a plant, we often imagine roots reaching down into soil. Roots anchor the plant. Roots absorb water. Roots take in minerals. Roots connect the plant to the ground. But mosses do not live in quite the same way. They do not send deep roots into the soil. They do not build large underground systems. They do not draw water upward through woody trunks. They do not depend on a hidden network of roots in the same way a tree, grass, or flowering plant does. Instead, mosses use simpler structures called rhizoids. Rhizoids look a little like roots, but they are not true roots. They are usually thin, hair-like filaments. Their main function is to help the moss attach to a surface. A stone, a log, a patch of soil, the bark of a tree, a roof tile, a wall, a shaded crack in pavement. Rhizoids help hold the moss in place. They give it contact with the surface, but they do not absorb water and nutrients in the same powerful, organized way as the roots of vascular plants. This difference changes everything about how moss lives. A tree is built around vertical movement. Roots take in water. Xylem carries it upward. Leaves release water vapor through transpiration. Sugars made in the leaves move through phloem. The plant body is connected by internal transport tissues. Moss is built differently. It lives close to the surface. It absorbs water over much of its body. Its leaf-like structures, outer cells, and spaces within the moss mat all take part in holding moisture. Instead of pulling water from deep underground, moss waits for water to arrive. Rain, mist, dew, fog, splash from a stream, moist air, a damp surface after a cool night. When water returns, moss can take it in quickly. When water disappears, many mosses can slow down. This makes moss a plant of pulses, wet and active, dry and paused, wet and active again. Because mosses lack true roots and strong vascular tissues, they usually stay small. Their small size is not accidental. It is part of how they function. A small body has short distances for water to move. A thin leaf-like structure can absorb moisture directly. A dense cushion can hold droplets between its shoots. A mat of moss can behave almost like a sponge. Water moves through it, not by deep roots and long tubes, but through surfaces and tiny spaces. One of the important physical processes here is capillary action. Capillary action happens when water moves through narrow spaces because of the interaction between water molecules and surfaces. Water molecules are attracted to each other. This is cohesion. Water molecules are also attracted to many other surfaces. This is adhesion. In very small spaces, these forces can pull water along or hold it in place. A moss mat is full of tiny spaces between shoots, between leaf-like structures, between overlapping surfaces. Between the moss and the stone or soil below it, water can be held in these spaces. It can spread through them. It can remain there after rain has stopped. This capillary storage is one reason moss can feel moist long after the surface around it begins to dry. In very small spaces, these forces can pull water along or hold it in place. A moss mat is full of tiny spaces between shoots, between leaf-like structures, between overlapping surfaces, between the moss and the stone or soil below it. Water can be held in these spaces. It can spread through them. It can remain there after rain has stopped. This capillary storage is one reason moss can feel moist long after the surface around it begins to dry. The moss is not only a plant, it is also a small water-holding structure. Its architecture helps create its environment. A bare stone may shed rain quickly, but a stone covered in moss can hold water at the surface. The moss slows the water, it traps droplets, it keeps a thin, damp layer where cells can remain active. This ability can matter in forests, wetlands, and rocky places. A moss patch can create a miniature moist habitat on a surface that would otherwise be too dry, too hard, or too exposed. The leaf-like parts of moss are often only one cell layer thick, or very thin compared with the leaves of vascular plants. This thinness allows water and gases to move in and out relatively easily. Carbon dioxide can enter for photosynthesis. Water can be absorbed from the surface, but thinness also means moss can dry out quickly. There is a trade-off. Moss can take in water easily, but it can also lose water easily. Instead of preventing water loss as strongly as many vascular plants do, many mosses tolerate drying. This is called desiccation tolerance. Desiccation means extreme drying. Some mosses can lose most of their water and enter a state of very low metabolic activity. Their cells become dry. Photosynthesis slows or stops. Growth pauses. The moss may curl, shrink, darken, or look brittle, but it may not be dead. This is why moss often seems to come alive after rain. It was alive before, but water changes its visible state. Dry moss may look dull and closed. Wet moss may look bright, open, and soft. The difference is water. The same theme that guided our first journey through rain continues here, close to the ground. Water shapes the life of moss, not from far above, but in thin films, droplets, and damp spaces. When water returns, the moss can rehydrate. Cells take up water. Membranes recover. Photosynthesis resumes. The plant opens again. This ability is remarkable. Many familiar plants would be badly damaged if their tissues dried so completely, but some mosses are adapted to survive repeated drying and re-wetting. This does not mean all mosses can survive any dryness. Different species have different tolerances. Some need consistently wet habitats. Some can live in places that dry regularly. Some are adapted to exposed rocks. Some prefer shaded forests. Some grow in bogs and wetlands. But as a group, mosses often show a strong relationship with water pulses. Rain arrives. Moss activates. Water leaves. Moss slows down. The rhythm of moss is closely tied to moisture. This rhythm also affects photosynthesis. Mosses are photosynthetic plants. They use light, carbon dioxide, and water to make sugars. But if they are too dry, photosynthesis becomes limited. Without enough water, the cellular machinery cannot operate normally. When they rehydrate, many mosses can restart photosynthesis quickly. This makes them responsive to short wet periods, a brief rain shower, morning dew, fog condensation, moist air after sunset. These small events may be enough to give moss a period of activity. A tree may rely on deeper soil water. Moss may rely on the next film of moisture at the surface. Because mosses do not have deep roots, the chemistry of the surface matters too. They interact closely with the uppermost layer of their habitat. The bark they grow on, the mineral surface of a rock, the acidity of soil, the water that washes over them, the dust that settles onto them. Nutrients can come from rainwater, particles in the air, decaying organic matter, and the surfaces where they grow. Some mosses are sensitive to pollution or changes in air chemistry. Others tolerate urban environments. Some prefer acidic conditions. Others grow on more basic rock. Their small scale does not make them independent of the environment. It makes them deeply exposed to it. Everything near the surface matters. Moisture, light, air quality, substrate, temperature, shade, competition. The word substrate is useful here. A substrate is the surface or material an organism grows on. For moss, the substrate might be soil, bark, stone, concrete, decaying wood, or peat. Because mosses have rhizoids rather than true roots, the substrate mainly provides attachment and local conditions. It does not always provide deep water access. This is why moss can grow on surfaces where rooted plants cannot easily live. A thin layer on stone, a roof, a wall, a tree trunk, a decaying log. This is one of its quiet strengths. It does not need a deep soil bed in every case. It can begin on surfaces. It can live in thin places. It can occupy the boundary between air and rock, air and bark, air and soil. But establishment is not always easy. A moss spore must land in a suitable place. It must have moisture. It must avoid being washed away, buried, scorched, or outcompeted. If conditions are right, it germinates into protonema, the early filamentous stage. From the protonema buds form. These buds grow into leafy gametophytes. Rhizoids anchor them. The moss patch begins to expand. At first, it may be almost invisible. A thin green film, a few tiny shoots, a small cushion. Over time, if conditions remain favorable, the patch becomes more obvious. It thickens, it catches more moisture, it traps particles, it creates more shelter for itself. In this way, moss can modify its own microhabitat. A microhabitat is a very small habitat with its own conditions. The top of a stone may be dry and exposed, but a crack in that stone may be shaded and damp. The north side of a tree trunk may have different light and moisture than the south side. A decaying log may hold water differently from living bark. A hollow between roots may stay humid longer than an open patch of soil. Mosses often live at the scale of microhabitats. They respond to small differences. A few centimeters can matter. More shade here, more water there. A rougher surface, a slower drying time. A slight change in pH, a little more shelter from wind. Because moss is small, it can use these tiny opportunities. Its world is fine-grained. A human sees one rock. A moss experiences many possible habitats on that rock. Topside crack, overhang, rough surface, smooth surface, damp edge, dry ridge. Each part has a different chance of supporting life. This is part of why moss can make ordinary surfaces interesting. It reveals small differences in moisture, shade, and texture. Where moss grows, the conditions were just right often enough. Not perfect forever, just right often enough for survival. There is another reason smallness matters. Moss can live in dense communities. Many shoots grow close together. This density helps hold water. It reduces airflow inside the mat. It shades the lower parts. It traps organic particles. It creates a more stable microclimate than a single isolated shoot would have. A moss cushion is not just many individuals side by side. It is a collective structure. The group helps create the conditions that support the group. Water remains longer, humidity stays higher. Temperature changes may be softened near the surface. Tiny animals find shelter. Spores and particles are trapped. The moss mat becomes a small living fabric. This is why stepping on moss can feel soft. The softness comes from many tiny plant bodies, spaces filled with air or water, and the flexible structure of the mat. But this softness can also make moss vulnerable to disturbance. A thick moss layer may take time to grow. If it is torn away, scraped off, or dried repeatedly, recovery can be slow. Moss often grows slowly compared with many flowering plants. Its strategy is not rapid height or fast seed production. It is persistence. Surface occupation, moisture use, spore release. Survival through pauses. In some ecosystems, mosses play major roles. In bogs, sphagnum moss can build thick layers of peat. Sphagnum has special water-holding cells that can store large amounts of water. Over time, dead sphagnum material can accumulate under wet, oxygen conditions and form peat. Peatlands can store large amounts of carbon, so some mosses influence not only tiny stones or forest floors, but entire landscapes and global carbon cycles. This shows that small plants can have large effects, not because they are tall, but because they are abundant, persistent, and connected to water and decomposition. Even ordinary moss patches can affect their surroundings. They slow water movement, they hold moisture, they trap dust, they protect soil surfaces, they provide habitat for tiny invertebrates. They create conditions for microbes. They may help early soil development on rocks and disturbed surfaces. Their lack of true roots does not make them passive. They interact with the surface in other ways. They grip, they absorb, they store, they shade, they shelter, they pause and revive. Moss life is a different solution to the same challenge all land plants face. How to get water, how to stay attached, how to photosynthesize, how to reproduce, how to survive dry air, how to live between the ground and the sky. Trees solve this with roots, wood, vascular tissues, height, and leaves. Flowering plants solve it with roots, stems, leaves, seeds, and flowers. Mosses solve it with smallness, surface absorption, rhizoid spores, water-assisted reproduction, and tolerance of drying. It is not a lesser solution, it is a different one. A low-green architecture for damp surfaces. When you see moss on a stone after rain, you are seeing this architecture at work. The rhizoids hold the plant to the stone. The tiny shoots stand together. Capillary spaces hold water. Cells rehydrate, photosynthesis resumes. The moss mat becomes active, and when the air dries again, the same moss may slow down, curl inward, and wait. This waiting is part of its biology. Moss does not need every hour to be wet. It needs enough wet moments, returning often enough to continue. A foggy morning, a cool night, a shaded afternoon, a thin film of dew, a passing shower, each one can become a small window of life. This is how moss lives without true roots. Not by reaching deeply into the world, but by staying close to its surface, by holding water when it comes, by tolerating dryness when it leaves, by using small spaces, by anchoring lightly, by growing slowly, by turning stones, bark, logs, and soil into green places where moisture can linger. And once moss has enough water and enough time, it does more than survive. It reproduces, it makes spores, it sends tiny capsules into the air. And its life cycle begins to unfold in one of the most distinctive ways among land plants. Mosses do not make seeds, they do not produce flowers, they do not form fruits. They reproduce in a way that is older and very different from the reproduction of flowering plants. They make spores. A spore is not the same as a seed. A seed usually contains a young plant embryo, stored food, and a protective seed coat. Many seeds are built to wait, travel, and then germinate when conditions are suitable. Seeds are part of the life cycle of seed plants, such as conifers and flowering plants. A moss spore is simpler. It is usually a single reproductive cell with a protective wall. It does not contain the same kind of stored food supply as a seed. It does not carry a tiny packaged plant in quite the same way. Instead, if it lands in a suitable place, it can grow into the first stage of a new moss plant. This difference matters. Seeds helped many plants spread across land in powerful new ways, but mosses use spores, and their life cycle remains closely tied to moisture. To understand moss reproduction, we need to return to the two main phases of the land plant life cycle. Gametophyte. In mosses, the green moss body we usually see is the gametophyte. This is the dominant generation. It is the soft green mat, the cushion on a stone, the tiny forest on a log, the low plant body with leaf-like structures. The gametophyte makes gametes are reproductive cells. In mosses, male structures produce sperm, female structures produce eggs. The male reproductive structures are called antheridia. The female reproductive structures are called archegonia. These names may sound technical, but their roles are simple. Antheridia produce sperm. Archegonia hold eggs. In many mosses, these structures form near the tips of the gametophyte shoots. Sometimes male and female structures occur on the same plant. Sometimes they occur on separate plants. The details vary between species, but the basic requirement is often the same. For fertilization to happen, sperm must reach the egg, and moss sperm usually need water to move. This is one of the most important facts about moss biology. Mosses live on land, but their reproduction still carries a strong connection to water. The sperm cells that means they have tiny whip-like structures that help them swim. They cannot travel through dry air to reach the egg. They need a film of water, rainwater, dew, a thin layer of moisture, water held inside a moss mat. When the surface is wet, sperm can move from the antheridia toward the archegonia. Chemical signals may help guide them. The distances are small, but for a moss, those small distances matter. A thin film of water can become a temporary pathway for reproduction. This is why rainfall, mist, or dew can be important for the moss life cycle. Water does not only rehydrate the moss, it can make fertilization possible. When a sperm reaches an egg inside the archegonium, fertilization occurs. The fertilized egg becomes a zygote. This zygote begins to grow into the sporophyte generation. In mosses, the sporophyte does not become an independent large plant. It remains attached to the gamete. It depends on it for water, minerals, and often much of its nutrition. This is different from flowering plants, where the sporophyte is the large visible plant. In mosses, the sporophyte is usually a smaller structure growing out of the gametophyte. You may have seen it without realizing what it was. A moss cushion may produce many thin stalks rising above the green surface. At the end of each stalk is a small capsule. These stalked capsules are the stalk is called the seta. The capsule is called the sporangium. Inside the capsule, spores are produced. A field of moss capsules can look like a miniature forest of tiny lanterns, pins, or seed heads, but they are not seeds. They are spore capsules. They are part of a generation attached to the green moss below. The sporophyte usually has three main pods: a foot, which remains embedded in the gametophyte and helps absorb resources from it. In many mosses, it begins covered by a cap called the calyptra. The calyptra comes from tissue of the archegonium. It protects the young capsule as it develops. As the capsule matures, the calyptra may fall away. Many capsules also have a lid, called the operculum. When the spores are mature and conditions are right, the operculum can detach. Underneath, in many mosses, there is a ring of tiny tooth-like structures called periosteum teeth. These peristome teeth are one of the most delicate and interesting parts of moss reproduction. They help control how spores are released. They often respond to humidity. When the air is damp, the teeth may close or move in a way that reduces spore release. When the air is drier, they may open and allow spores to escape. This helps release spores in conditions when they may be more easily carried by air. A dry breeze can carry spores farther than still damp air. So the capsule is not just a passive container. It is a small dispersal device. It produces spores, protects them, and in many species, releases them gradually. Timing matters. Humidity matters. Air movement matters. The capsule opens. Spores escape. Some may fall close to the parent moss. Some may be carried by wind. Some may land on soil. Some on bark. Some on stone. Some in places too dry, too bright, too unstable, or too shaded. Most spores will not become mature moss plants. This is normal. Spore production relies on numbers. Many spores are released. Only some land in suitable microhabitats. Only some germinate. Only some survive long enough to grow into new gametophytes. A moss spore needs the right conditions: moisture, a suitable surface, enough light, the right chemistry, protection from being washed away or buried. If conditions are right, the spore it does not immediately become the leafy moss body we recognize. First, it often grows into a structure called protonema. The protonema is an early moss stage. It may look like a thin green filament or a branching network. In some mosses, it resembles a tiny alga at first glance. It spreads across the surface. It explores the microhabitat at a very small scale. From this protonema, small buds can form. These buds grow into the leafy gametophyte shoots. The familiar moss plant begins. Rhizoids anchor it. Leaf-like structures develop. The moss mat expands. Later, when mature and when conditions allow, it can produce antheridia and archegonia. The cycle continues: spore, protonema, gametophyte, gametes, fertilization, sporophyte, capsule, spores. This alternation between gametophyte and sporophyte is called alternation of generations. All land plants have it, but mosses make it especially visible. In mosses, you can often see both generations at once. The green mat is the gametophyte. The stalked capsule rising from it is the sporophyte. Two generations connected physically, one supporting the other. This is one of the elegant details of moss biology. The part that looks like the main plant is the gametophyte. The part that makes spores is the sporophyte. In flowering plants, the situation is reversed. The large visible plant is the sporophyte, and the gametophytes are tiny and hidden inside pollen grains and ovules. Mosses preserve a different balance. Their gametophyte generation remains large enough to notice. Their sporophyte generation remains attached and dependent. This gives mosses a life cycle that feels almost inverted compared with the plants we know best. The need for water during fertilization also connects moss reproduction to habitat. Tiny sperm cells moving through water, eggs held in archegonia, fertilization beginning a new sporophyte, a stalk slowly rising, a capsule forming, spores developing inside. The entire cycle can be quiet and small, but it is not simple in a trivial way. It requires timing, structure, water, cell division, genetic exchange, development, dispersal, and chance. Not all moss reproduction is sexual. Mosses can also reproduce asexually. Some mosses spread by fragments. A piece of moss can break off, land in a suitable place, and grow. Some produce small vegetative propagules called gemmae. These can detach and form new plants. Asexual reproduction allows mosses to expand locally without the need for fertilization. This can be useful where conditions are stable, but sexual reproduction is limited. Fragments may be moved by water, animals, wind, or disturbance. A tiny piece of moss can become the beginning of another patch. So mosses have more than one strategy. Spores allow dispersal over distance. Fragments and gemmae allow local spread. Sexual reproduction creates new genetic combinations. Asexual reproduction preserves successful forms and helps colonize nearby surfaces. Together, these strategies make mosses flexible. They may be small, but they are not helpless. The spore capsule itself can vary widely between moss species. Some capsules are upright, some are tilted, some are long and narrow, some are rounder. Some have elaborate peristome teeth, some have simpler openings. Some release spores gradually, some release them more suddenly. The shape of the capsule, the length of the seta, and the behavior of the opening structures all influence dispersal. At moss scale, architecture matters. A taller seta can reach moving air. A capsule opening in dry conditions can improve wind dispersal. A peristome can meter spores out slowly instead of releasing all at once. This gives the moss more chances, different breezes, different hours, different humidity levels. One capsule may release spores over time, not in a single dramatic burst, but in small opportunities. Again, moss biology works with patience. It does not need one perfect moment. It can use many small ones. Spores themselves are tiny. Because they are small, they can be carried by air. But smallness also has a cost. A spore has limited resources. It must land somewhere suitable quickly enough to survive and germinate. A seed may contain food reserves to support early growth. A moss spore has less stored support. It depends strongly on the environment. This is why producing many spores is useful. A moss does not know where the wind will take them. It releases many possibilities into the air. Most will fail. A few may find a damp crack, a shaded log, or a suitable patch of soil. Those few can begin new moss life. The early protonema stage is especially interesting because it shows how moss development begins as a spreading network rather than as a tiny version of the adult shoot. The protonema can branch across a surface. It can produce many buds. From one spore, multiple gametophyte shoots may arise. This helps a moss establish a small colony. It creates a more stable microclimate than a single isolated shoot would have. A moss cushion is not just many individuals side by side. It is a collective structure. The group helps create the conditions that support the group. Water remains longer, humidity stays higher. Temperature changes may be softened near the surface. Tiny animals find shelter. Spores and particles are trapped. The moss mat becomes a small living fabric. This is why stepping on moss can feel soft. The first stage explores, the later stage builds. In some species, the protonema is short-lived. In others, it can persist longer. Environmental conditions influence the transition from protonema to leafy shoots. Light, moisture, nutrients, and hormones all play roles. Even at this small scale, development is regulated. The moss body is not random green growth. It is organized. Cells divide in patterns. Structures form. The life cycle moves through recognizable stages. In a mature moss patch, many individual shoots may be packed together. Some may produce male structures, some female structures. Some may support sporophytes. Some may remain vegetative. The patch as a whole can contain different phases at once. Green gametophytes, developing sporophytes, mature capsules, release spores, new protonema nearby, fragments beginning to grow. A moss patch is not a single moment. It is many moments layered together. When we look at moss capsules after rain, we are seeing the result of earlier moisture, earlier fertilization, earlier growth. The capsule is a memory of a successful reproductive event. It stands above the mat as a small structure built for dispersal. If conditions dry, the capsule may open. If air moves, spores may travel. If a spore lands well, the next patch begins. This entire process can happen on a surface no larger than a hand, a stone, a log, a piece of bark, a crack in a wall. The scale is small, but the life cycle is complete. Moss has solved reproduction without flowers, without seeds, without fruit, and without deep roots. It uses water for fertilization, spores for dispersal, capsules for release, protonema for establishment, gametophytes for the main plant body, sporophytes for spore production. This system has persisted for hundreds of millions of years. Mosses belong to ancient lineages of land plants. They remind us that life on land did not begin with flowers and forests. Before flowering plants, before grasses, before many familiar plant forms, small spore-producing plants were part of Earth's green surface. Mosses today are not fossils. They are modern organisms. They have evolved. They are diverse, but their life cycle preserves features that connect them to early land plant history. A dependence on water for sperm movement, a dominant gametophyte, spores rather than seeds, small bodies close to the surface. These features make mosses scientifically important. They help us understand plant evolution. They also help us notice that there are many ways to be a plant. A plant does not need flowers to be complex. It does not need height to matter. It does not need seeds to spread. It can live close to stone, wait for rain, release spores into a small breeze, and build a green world millimeter by millimeter. This is the quiet, reproductive life of moss. Water brings activity. Sperm, swim, eggs are fertilized. Sporophytes rise, capsules, mature spores release, protonema spreads, new shoots appear. The cycle continues, often hidden in plain sight. And while moss follows this ancient plant pattern, lichens follow a very different path. They are not plants. They do not have roots, stems, leaves, flowers, or seeds. They are partnerships between organisms from different kingdoms. And in the next scene, we will begin to look at the quiet biology of lichens. Lichens are often mistaken for moss. They may grow on the same stone. They may share the same tree bark. They may appear together on a damp wall, a forest branch, or an old roof tile. But lichens are not moss. Moss is a plant. A lichen is something stranger. A lichen is a living partnership. It is usually formed by a fungus and a photosynthetic partner. The fungal partner is called the mycobiont. The photosynthetic partner is called the photobiont. The photobiont may be a green alga, or it may be a in some lichens, more than one photosynthetic partner may be involved. Together, these organisms form a body that looks and behaves like a single living thing. This body is called a thallus. The thallus is the visible lichen, the pale patch on rock, the leafy shape on bark, the branching form hanging from a twig, the crust that seems painted onto stone. When we look at a lichen, we are not looking at a plant with roots and leaves. We are looking at a structured partnership between organisms. A fungus gives the lichen much of its shape and physical structure. It forms threads called hyphae. These fungal hyphae weave together, surround the photosynthetic cells, attach to surfaces, hold water, and help protect the partnership from harsh conditions. The photobiont captures light. Using photosynthesis, it makes sugars from carbon dioxide and water. Those sugars provide energy for the partnership. In simple terms, the fungus gives structure, shelter, and a place to live. The alga or cyanobacterium gives food made from light. This is the basic lichen arrangement, but like most simple statements in biology, it hides a lot of detail. A lichen is not just a fungus carrying an alga, it is an organized living system. It has layers, it has chemistry, it has growth patterns, it has reproductive strategies. It responds to light, water, temperature, air quality, and the surface where it grows. It can be very slow, very patient, and very tough. Lichens can live in places where many plants cannot. Bare rock, tree bark, old walls, roof tiles, cold tundra, dry deserts, mountain surfaces, exposed branches. They do not need soil in the same way rooted plants do. They do not have true roots. They do not absorb water through a root system. Instead, they take in water and dissolved substances across their surface. Rain, fog, dew, and humid air can all provide moisture. When wet, a lichen may become active. When dry, it may slow down dramatically. Like moss, many lichens live in pulses, wet and active, dry and paused, wet and active again. But lichens are not plants waiting for water. They are partnerships waiting for conditions that allow the partnership to function. The fungus and photobiont must remain together. The structure must protect them. The photosynthetic cells must receive enough light. The whole thallus must survive drying, heating, freezing, and exposure. This makes lichens especially interesting. They are not one organism solving life alone. They are cooperation made visible. The word symbiosis is often used for this kind of close biological relationship. Symbiosis means living together. In lichens, the relationship is usually described as mutualistic, meaning both partners benefit. The fungus receives sugars from the photobiont. The photobiont receives protection, structure, and access to a stable microenvironment. However, scientists also discuss the relationship in more complex ways. The fungus often controls much of the structure. The photobiont may live under conditions shaped by the fungus. Some researchers describe lichen symbiosis as a controlled partnership rather than a simple equal friendship. Biology is rarely as neat as a diagram. Still, the result is remarkable. Together, the partners form something neither would make alone. A lichen is a biological collaboration with its own visible body. Lichens come in several main forms. One common form is crustose. Crustose lichens grow tightly attached to the surface. They may look like colored crusts, stains, or paint on rock or bark. They are often difficult to remove without taking some of the surface with them. Crustose lichens can be very thin. They may spread slowly across stone, in circular patches. They can be gray, white, orange, yellow, greenish, or dark. Some crustose lichens make rock look old, weathered, and patterned. They are among the most tightly attached forms. Another form is foliose. Foliose lichens are leaf-like. They have flattened lobes that may lift slightly from the surface. They are more three-dimensional than crustose lichens. If you look closely, a foliose lichen may have overlapping lobes, curled edges, and a distinct upper and lower surface. Some foliose lichens look like tiny, wrinkled leaves pressed against bark. Others form rosettes. They can be gray-green, blue-green, brown, yellowish, or pale. Foliose lichens are often easier to notice than crustose forms because they have visible lobes and texture. A third form is fruticose lichens on branching or shrub. They may stand upright from the surface or hang from branches. Some look like tiny shrubs. Some look like threads. Some look like pale green or gray beards hanging from trees. Reindeer lichen, for example, is a fruticose lichen. So-called old man's beard lichens are also. These forms are more three-dimensional and often have a delicate branching structure. There are other forms and intermediate shapes, but crustose, foliose, and fruticose are the main categories to begin with. Crustose means crust-like. Foliose means leaf-like. Fruticose means shrubby or branching. These forms are not just visual, they affect how the lichen interacts with water, light, air, and its substrate. The crustose lichen is tightly bound to its surface. The foliose lichen creates lobes and small spaces beneath them. A fruticose lichen extends into the air, increasing exposure to light and moisture, but also to drying. The shape of the thallus is part of the lichen's way of life. If we could look inside many lichens, we would see layers. A common foliose lichen has an upper cortex. Below that, there is a layer where the photobionts cells are concentrated. Below that, a looser fungal layer called the medulla, and in many foliose lichens, a lower cortex. From the lower surface, some lichens produce small anchoring structures called rhizines. Rhizines help attach the lichen to the substrate. They are not roots. They do not absorb water and nutrients like plant roots. They are attachment structures made of fungal tissue. Again, we see a theme shared with moss, but achieved differently. No true roots. Close contact with the surface. Water absorbed across the body. Attachment without deep feeding. But lichens and mosses do this through different biology. Moss uses plant tissues and rhizoids. Lichen uses fungal structure and symbiosis. The upper cortex of a lichen helps protect the thallus. It can reduce damage from light, drying, and physical stress. The photobiont layer must be positioned where light can reach it. Too deep, and photosynthesis becomes difficult. Too exposed, and the cells may be damaged. The medulla can store air and water, and gives the thallus internal structure. In some lichens, pigments in the cortex help protect against intense light or ultraviolet radiation. Some pigments give lichens their yellow, orange, brown, or dark colors. These colors are not decoration in the human sense. They are chemistry, protection, light management, environmental response. A bright orange lichen on rock may be using compounds that help manage exposure to sunlight. A pale gray lichen may reflect light differently. A dark lichen may absorb more heat. Color can tell part of the story, though not always a simple one. Lichens grow slowly. Many species grow only a few millimeters per year, and some grow even more slowly. This slow growth makes them useful in some scientific contexts. In certain environments, the size of lichen patches on exposed rock has been used to estimate how long a surface has been exposed. This method is called lichen. It must be used carefully because growth rates vary by species, climate, surface, and conditions. But the idea shows how slow and persistent lichens can be. A lichen patch may remain on a stone for many years and may expand quietly, edge by edge. It may survive dry seasons, cold nights, and intense sunlight. It may be older than it looks. This slow growth is one reason lichens are easily damaged by disturbance. If a lichen is scraped from rock, it may take a long time to return. If air quality changes, sensitive lichens may disappear. If bark conditions change, the lichen community may shift. Lichens can be tough against weather, but vulnerable to some environmental changes. This combination is part of their scientific importance. They can survive extremes, yet many are sensitive to air pollution. Because they absorb water and dissolve materials directly from the atmosphere, lichens can accumulate pollutants. Some species are especially sensitive to sulfur dioxide, nitrogen compounds, heavy metals, or other pollutants. For this reason, lichens have often been used as bioindicators. A bioindicator is an organism that gives information about environmental conditions. The presence, absence, or health of certain lichens can tell us something about air quality. In places with cleaner air, sensitive lichen species may be more diverse. In polluted areas, only tolerant species may remain. This is not a perfect rule everywhere, because climate, bark, chemistry, humidity, and other factors also matter. But lichens can provide useful clues. They live in close contact with the air. They do not shed leaves every year, like many trees. They do not have roots pulling most resources from soil. They receive much of what they need from rain, dust, fog, and the atmosphere, so the air leaves a mark on them. A lichen on bark is not only living on a tree, it is also sampling the air around that tree. Lichens are sometimes called pioneer organisms. This means they can colonize surfaces where few other organisms can live at first. Bare rock is a good example. A new rock surface may have little or no soil. A crustose lichen may attach to it. The lichen grows slowly. Its fungal threads and chemical compounds interact with the rock surface. Physical expansion and contraction, moisture, organic acids, and tiny trapped particles can all contribute to slow weathering. Over time, bits of mineral and organic matter accumulate. The surface changes. This does not mean lichens alone instantly make soil. The process is slow. But lichens can be part of the earliest biological stages of colonization. They help begin the transformation of bare surface into living surface. This connects them to moss. On rocks, lichens may arrive early. Mosses may follow where enough moisture and particles accumulate. Other organisms may later join. Small changes build into larger ones. Stone becomes patterned. Cracks hold particles. Moisture lingers. A living skin begins to form. Lichens can also live on bark without harming the tree, in most cases. Many people see lichens on branches and assume the lichen is damaging the tree. Usually, lichens are epiphytes. An epiphyte is an organism that grows on another plant for support, without taking nutrients from it in a parasitic way. Lichens use bark as a surface. They do not have roots penetrating the tree to steal sap. However, lichen growth can be more noticeable on older, slower growing, or stressed branches, simply because the bark remains stable long enough for lichens to establish. So lichens may be associated with stressed trees, but they are often not the cause of the stress. They are passengers on the surface, slow settlers, not usually attackers. This is another reason understanding lichens matters. They are easy to misread. They are not moss. They are not mold in the ordinary household sense. They are not usually parasites on tree bark. They are symbiotic structures living on surfaces, using light, air, water, and time. Inside their thallus, the fungal partner creates a home for photosynthetic cells. The photobiont uses light to make sugars. The structure holds together. The surface receives rain and dew. The lichen dries and rehydrates. Growth continues slowly. The partnership persists. Lichens can reproduce in several ways. Some reproduce sexually through the fungal partner. The fungus may produce spores and structures such as apothecia, which can look like tiny discs or cups on the lichen surface. These fungal spores disperse. But to form a new lichen, the fungal spore must find a compatible photobiont. This is a challenge. A fungus alone is not the full lichen. It needs the photosynthetic partner. Lichens also reproduce asexually, using structures that contain both partners. These include Soredia and Soredia are tiny, powdery bundles of fungal hyphae and photobiont cells. They can break off and disperse. Icedia are small outgrowths from the lichen surface that also contain both partners. They can detach and start new lichens. Elsewhere, these asexual structures are efficient because they carry the partnership together. Fungus and photobiont travel as a unit. This avoids the problem of a fungal spore having to find the right partner later. Again, lichen biology is about partnership. Even reproduction must solve the problem of keeping partners together or reuniting them after dispersal. A lichen is not a simple individual in the way we often imagine an individual. It is more like a small organized consortium, a body made by relationship, a form built from cooperation, control, chemistry, and contact with the atmosphere. Some modern research has shown that lichens may include more organisms than the classic fungus plus alga model suggests. Additional fungi, bacteria, and other microorganisms can live within or on lichens. This makes lichens even more like microecosystems. The traditional model is still useful, mycobiont and photobiont, but the full reality can be richer. A lichen thallus may host bacterial communities, yeasts, secondary fungi, tiny interactions we are still learning to understand. So the quiet patch on a rock may be more crowded than it appears. From a distance, it is just a pale mark. Up close, it is a layered structure. On microscopic scale, it is a community. Fungal filaments, photosynthetic cells, pigments, air spaces, water films, microbes, surface chemistry, light, time. This is why lichens feel especially suited to a calm science journey. They look still, but they are biologically intricate. They grow slowly, but their structure is complex. They seem like surface stains, but they are living systems. They are small, but they can survive in large extremes. They do not shout for attention. They wait on bark and stone. They mark old walls. They color branches. They soften exposed surfaces with gray, green, yellow, and orange. And when rain or mist returns, they wake into activity. Water enters the thallus. The photosynthetic partner can resume work. The fungus holds the structure. The partnership continues. To understand lichens, we must understand symbiosis more deeply, not just as a pleasant word for cooperation, but as a biological arrangement with structure, exchange, dependence, and tension. The fungus and the phocian live together. Each changes the conditions of the other. Each makes the lichen possible. And in the next scene, we will look more closely at this partnership. The fungus, the alga, the cyanobacteria, and the quiet exchange that allows a lichen to exist. Symbiosis means living together. It is a close relationship between different organisms. Sometimes both partners benefit. Sometimes one benefits and the other is harmed. Sometimes one benefits and the other is not strongly affected. In lichens, symbiosis usually refers to the close relationship between a fungus and a photosynthetic partner. The fungus is called the photosynthetic partner is called the photobient. The photobient is often a green alga. In some lichens, it is a cyanobacterium. And in some cases, lichens may include both. This partnership creates the lichen body. The fungus alone is not the visible lichen. The alga or cyanobacterium alone is not the visible lichen. Together, under the right conditions, they form a structured body that can attach to bark, stone, soil, or other surfaces. The mycobient usually makes up most of the lichen's physical structure. Fungal hyphae weave through the thallus. They form protective layers, they create spaces, they hold the photobient cells in position. They help absorb and retain water. They attach the lichen to its substrate, and they produce many of the chemical compounds that make lichens so distinctive. The photobient has a different role. It captures light. Through photosynthesis, it uses light energy to convert carbon dioxide and water into sugars. These sugars provide energy and carbon compounds that the fungus can use. Without the photobient, the fungus would not have this steady internal source of photosynthetic food. Without the fungus, the photobient might not survive in the same exposed places. The fungus creates a habitat. The photobient powers it with light. This is the basic exchange. Structure for sugar, shelter for photosynthesis, a home for energy. But the relationship is more complex than a simple trade. The fungus shapes the environment around the photobient. It controls how much light reaches it, how much water is held near it, how protected it is from drying and ultraviolet radiation, how gases move through the thallus. The photobient, in turn, must live inside this fungal structure. It gives up some of the sugars it produces. It exists in a controlled space. So the lichen relationship is often mutualistic, but it is not necessarily equal in a simple emotional sense. The fungus is usually the architect. The photobient is the light-capturing partner. The lichen is the structure that results. This is why some scientists describe lichens as controlled symbiosis. The partners benefit, but their relationship includes dependence and regulation. Biology often works this way, not as pure harmony, not as pure conflict, but as organized tension that can become stable over time. The photobient is often a green alga. Green algae are photosynthetic organisms. They contain chlorophyll. They can use light to make sugars. In many lichens, the algal cells are held in a layer beneath the upper cortex of the lichen thallus. This position is important. The cells need light, but they also need protection. Too much exposure can damage them. Too little light limits photosynthesis, so the lichen structure places them where they can function. Close enough to light, protected enough to survive. Cyanobacteria are different. They are bacteria, not algae, though they also perform photosynthesis. Some cyanobacteria can also fix nitrogen. Nitrogen fixation means converting atmospheric nitrogen gas into forms that living organisms can use. This is important because nitrogen gas is abundant in the atmosphere, but most organisms cannot use it directly. They need nitrogen in reactive forms, such as ammonium or nitrate. Some cyanobacteria can make this conversion. When a lichen contains nitrogen-fixing cyanobacteria, it can gain access to nitrogen in nutrient-poor environments. This can be ecologically important. In some forests, tundra, and rocky habitats, cyanobacterial lichens contribute nitrogen to ecosystems. When pieces of lichen fall, decay, or are washed by rain, some of that nitrogen can enter the surrounding environment. This makes certain lichens part of nutrient cycling. Small organisms, slow growth, large ecological meaning. Not all lichens fix nitrogen. Only those with suitable cyanobacterial partners can do this. Most lichens with green algal partners rely on other sources of nitrogen, such as dust, rainwater, bark chemistry, animal droppings, or atmospheric deposition. The identity of the photobient matters. It affects where the lichen can live, how it responds to moisture, how it uses light, and what role it may play in the ecosystem. Some lichens are more tolerant of dry conditions. Some need humid habitats. Some grow in bright, exposed places. Some prefer shaded bark. Some are sensitive to pollution. Some tolerate difficult urban conditions. The symbiosis is not one single formula. It is a family of partnerships. Different fungi, different algae, different cyanobacteria, different structures, different chemistries, different habitats. One of the remarkable things about lichens is that many lichen-forming fungi cannot produce the same lichen structure without their photobionts. In laboratory culture, the fungal partner may grow as fungal threads. The photobiont may grow separately, but the recognizable lichen thallus forms when they come together and develop as a partnership. This means the lichen body is an emergent form. Emergent means that the whole has properties that are not obvious from the parts alone. A fungus plus an alga becomes something with new structure, new chemistry, and new ecological abilities. The lichen is not just two organisms sitting beside each other. It is a new organized state, a joint body, a biological arrangement that changes both partners. The fungal hyphae are central to this arrangement. Hyphae are thread-like fungal cells. They can branch, weave, and form dense networks. In a lichen, hyphae create they can form a dense upper cortex, which protects the surface. They can form a looser medulla, which creates internal space. They can surround photobiont cells. They can form attachment structures. They can absorb water quickly when it arrives. Fungal hyphae are good at creating structure from threads. This is one reason fungi are powerful builders at small scales. They can fill space, connect surfaces, hold cells, bind particles, create layered bodies. In lichens, this fungal architecture becomes a house for photosynthesis. The thallus must manage water carefully. Lichens do not have roots to draw water continuously from soil. They absorb water across their surface. When rain, fog, or DO arrives, the thallus may hydrate. The fungal structure takes up water. The photobiont cells become active. Photosynthesis can begin or increase. When the lichen dries, metabolic activity slows dramatically. Many lichens can tolerate this drying. They can enter a dry, inactive state and later resume activity when water returns. This is called a poikilohydric organism does not maintain a stable internal water content in the way many vascular plants do. Its water content changes with the environment. When the environment is wet, it becomes hydrated. When the environment is dry, it dries. Many mosses and lichens share this trait. But again, they achieve it through different biology. For lichens, poikilohydry is part of survival on exposed surfaces. A lichen on rock cannot avoid dry air. It cannot move into shade. It cannot send roots down for water. It must survive cycles of hydration and drying. This creates a pulsed life. After rain, the lichen wakes. In dry sun, it pauses. During fog, it may hydrate again. At night, dew may give it a short period of activity. The active life of a lichen may happen in scattered windows of time. A few wet hours here, a foggy morning there, a cool humid night, a light rain. This is one reason many lichens grow slowly. They may not be active every day, and even when active, their photosynthetic rates can be limited by temperature, light, and water content. A wet lichen must also breathe in the chemical sense. It needs gas exchange. Carbon dioxide must reach the photobiont. Oxygen and water vapor must move. The thallus is a small physical environment where diffusion matters. Diffusion is the movement of molecules from areas of higher concentration to areas of lower concentration. In a lichen, carbon dioxide diffuses inward. Oxygen diffuses outward. Water moves through tissues and spaces. Sugars move from photobiont to fungus. The partnership depends on movement at microscopic scales. This is another reason lichen structure matters. Layer thickness, porosity, surface texture, water holding capacity. All of these influence how the symbiosis works. Lichens also produce many secondary compounds. These are chemicals not directly used for basic growth in the simplest sense, but important for protection, competition, light screening, mineral interaction, and defense. Some lichen compounds help protect against ultraviolet radiation. Some discourage herbivores or microbes. Some influence the breakdown of rock minerals. Some give lichens their colors. Lichen chemistry is rich. Many compounds are unique or especially common in lichens. For scientists, these chemicals can help identify species. They can also reveal how lichens interact with their environment. A yellow lichen on sunlit rock may contain pigments that help protect it from intense light. A bitter or toxic compound may reduce grazing. An acid may help interact with minerals. The thallus is not passive. It is chemically active. The partnership produces substances that help it survive. Some lichens are sensitive to air pollution because they absorb substances directly from the atmosphere. They do not have a waxy leaf system that replaces itself every season. They do not have roots selecting nutrients from soil in the same way plants do. Their entire surface is involved in exchange. This makes the symbiosis exposed. It takes in what the air and water bring. This exposure can be a strength in clean environments and a vulnerability in polluted ones. Again, lichens show a pattern we have seen before. They are tough in some ways, delicate in others. They can survive freezing, drying, and exposure, but they may be sensitive to chemical changes in the air. A lichen is a tough sleeper, not an invincible machine. The symbiosis must remain balanced. The fungus must maintain structure. The photobionts must remain alive and photosynthetic. Water must arrive sometimes. Light must reach the photobiont. Temperature must allow periods of activity. If the balance fails, the lichen may stop growing or die. If the balance holds, it may persist for years, decades, sometimes much longer. Some lichens grow so slowly that their presence gives a surface a sense of age. A rock with lichens feels settled. A branch with lichens feels old. Even if the lichen itself varies in age, they mark time by growth, millimeter by millimeter, season by season, wet period by wet period. The idea of a lichen as a holobiont can be useful. A holobiont is a host, plus its associated microorganisms, considered together as an ecological unit. In the case of lichens, the classic partners are the fungus and photobiont. But many lichens also contain bacteria and additional fungi. These associated organisms may influence nutrient cycling, stress tolerance, growth, or chemistry. The lichen is not always just two partners. It can be a small community, a microecosystem with a visible body. This does not mean we should abandon the basic definition. Fungus plus photobiont remains central. But it reminds us that nature is often more layered than our first categories. A lichen on bark may include a main fungus, a green alga, bacteria living on or inside the thallus yeasts, or other fungi. Tiny interactions we are still learning to understand. So the quiet patch on a rock may be more crowded than it appears. From a distance, it is just a pale mark. Up close, it is a layered structure. At microscopic scale, it is a community. Fungal filaments, photosynthetic cells, pigments, air spaces, water films, microbes, surface chemistry, light, time. This is why lichens feel especially suited to a calm science journey. They look still, but they are biologically intricate. They grow slowly, but their structure is complex. They seem like surface stains, but they are living systems. They are small, but they can survive in large extremes. They do not shout for attention. They wait on bark and stone. They mark old walls. They color branches. They soften exposed surfaces with gray, green, yellow, and orange. And when rain or mist returns, they wake into activity. Water enters the thallus, cells rehydrate, photosynthesis resumes, sugars move, gas exchange begins, chemistry continues. Then, when the surface dries, the system slows. It waits. The waiting is part of the partnership. The fungus protects. The photobiont endures. The thallus holds the possibility of activity until conditions return. This cycle can repeat many times. Rain and drying, fog and sun, night dew and afternoon heat, cold and thaw, stillness and activity. The lichen does not need constant comfort. It needs enough moments when the partnership can work. Enough light, enough water, enough time. From this, it builds a life on surfaces where many plants cannot begin. This is the quiet power of symbiosis. Not speed, not height, not flowers, not roots, but relationship, structure, exchange, endurance. The fungus, the alga, the cyanobacterium, and the many hidden associates form a small living system, and that system can cling to stone, color bark, help weather rock, hold moisture, and become part of a larger forest, tundra, desert, or mountain world. In the next scene, we will look at where mosses and lichens choose to live, why they often appear on stones, bark, shaded soil, old walls, and damp surfaces, and how their small bodies read the conditions of a place. Mosses and lichens often appear in places that seem quiet and ordinary. A stone beside a path, the shaded side of a tree, a damp wall, the surface of an old log, a crack between rocks, a roof tile that has held rain for many seasons. At first, these places may look empty. Hard surfaces, rough bark, thin soil, places where larger plants may not easily grow. But for mosses and lichens, these surfaces can become habitat. The key word is substrate. A substrate is the surface or material an organism grows on. For moss, The substrate may be soil, bark, stone, concrete, peat, or decaying wood. For lichen, the substrate may be rock, tree bark, soil, wood, or even human-made materials like brick and old roofing. The substrate is not just a background, it shapes the life of the organism. It affects attachment, moisture, chemistry, temperature, light, drying speed, and competition. A smooth, exposed stone may dry quickly. A rough stone with cracks may hold water longer. A tree bark surface with deep grooves may trap dust, spores, and moisture. A shaded wall may stay cool and damp. A decaying log may hold water like a sponge. Each surface creates a small environment, a microhabitat. Mosses and lichens are small enough to use these microhabitats. A human may see one tree trunk, but a moss or lichen experiences many different zones. The sunny side, the shaded side, the rough cracks, the smooth patches, the base near the soil. The upper bark exposed to wind, the place where rain runs down, the place where water lingers. The difference of a few centimeters can matter. More shade here, more moisture there, more minerals in this crack, more bark acidity on that side. A little more shelter from wind, a little less direct sun. This is why mosses and lichens can appear patchy. They are not placed randomly. Their distribution often reflects small differences in conditions. Moisture is one of the most important factors. Mosses need water for active metabolism. Many mosses can dry and later revive, but they need wet periods to photosynthesize, grow, and reproduce. Lichens also need moisture to become metabolically active. A dry lichen may be nearly dormant. A wet lichen can photosynthesize. So surfaces that hold water, receive dew, catch fog, or dry slowly can become valuable. Roughness helps. A rough stone has tiny pits and cracks. These spaces can trap water and particles. A smooth stone may shed water quickly. A rough surface gives spores and fragments places to lodge. It gives rhizoids or fungal structures places to grip. It creates small pockets where moisture lasts longer. This is one reason old stone walls can become rich surfaces for mosses and lichens. The stones have texture. The mortar has chemistry. Cracks hold dust. Rainwater collects in small edges. Shade may slow drying. Over time, living patches appear. Tree bark is another important substrate. Bark is not one uniform surface. It varies by tree species, age, texture, chemistry, and moisture. Some bark is smooth, some is deeply furrowed, some is acidic, some is more neutral or alkaline. Some holds water, some sheds it, some flakes away often, some remain stable for years. These differences influence which mosses and lichens can live there. Bark pH is especially important for many lichens. Some lichen species prefer acidic bark. Others grow better on bark that is less acidic or more neutral. Trees can therefore host different lichen communities depending on their bark chemistry. Oak, pine, beech, maple, ash, and other trees may support different sets of species. The bark is not just a place to sit, it is a chemical environment. Lichens growing on bark are usually an epiphyte grows on another plant for support without taking nutrients from it like a parasite. Most bark lichens do not feed on the tree. They use the bark as a surface. They receive light from above, water from rain, fog, and dew, minerals and nutrients from dust, air, and water moving across the bark. This is why lichens can grow on living trees without being the cause of tree disease. They are often passengers, surface dwellers, slow settlers. Mosses can also grow on bark, especially in humid forests. They may form green patches near the base of a trunk, along shaded sides, or on branches where moisture remains. In some forests, branches are covered with mosses, lichens, liverworts, and other epiphytes. These epiphyte communities can hold water, trap nutrients, and provide habitat for tiny organisms. On rocks, the word saxicolous is sometimes used. Saxicolous means living on, or among rocks. Many lichens are some mosses are too. Rock-dwelling species must deal with a difficult surface. Rock has no deep organic soil at first. It may become very hot in sun. It may become very cold at night. It may dry quickly. It may offer few nutrients. But rock can also provide stability. A rock surface may remain in place for decades, centuries, or longer. For slow-growing lichens, stability is valuable. A crustose lichen can attach tightly to rock and expand slowly. A moss may settle in a crack where particles and moisture collect. Over time, the rock surface becomes patterned with life. Rock chemistry matters. Limestone, granite, basalt, sandstone, and other rock types differ in mineral content and pH. Some lichens prefer calcareous rock, such as limestone, which is more alkaline. Others prefer acidic rock. Some are generalists, some are specialists. This is one reason a landscape's geology can influence its lichen communities. The chemistry of stone becomes part of the biology on its surface. Mosses may also respond to mineral conditions, though many depend strongly on moisture, shade, and surface stability. A rock crack filled with organic particles can support a small moss colony. A ledge that catches water can become green. A boulder under a forest canopy may host moss on the shaded side and lichens on the exposed side. Different organisms read the same rock differently. Shade is another major factor. Mosses often do well in shade because shaded places dry more slowly. Direct sunlight can increase evaporation and heat. A shaded forest floor stays cooler and more humid. This creates a better environment for many mosses, but mosses still need light for photosynthesis. Deep darkness is not ideal. The best habitat often has a balance. Enough shade to retain moisture, enough light to make sugars. This is why mosses often thrive in dappled light, under trees, beside paths, near streams, on the sides of rocks, at the bases of trunks. Light that is soft, not absent. Moisture that lingers, not floods constantly. Lichens vary widely in their light needs. Some prefer bright exposed rock. Others grow in shaded forests. Some tolerate strong sunlight because they produce protective pigments. Others need humid, sheltered places. A yellow or orange lichen on sunlit stone may be adapted to exposure. A pale green foliose lichen on bark may prefer more moderate conditions. A beard-like fruticose lichen, hanging from a branch, may be positioned to receive light and moisture from moving air. The form of the lichen and its habitat often fit together. Exposure and moisture create a trade-off. Bright places provide more light, but they may dry quickly. Shaded places hold moisture, but may limit photosynthesis. Mosses and lichens live within this balance. Too dry, and activity stops. Too dark, and photosynthesis is limited. Too unstable, and attachment fails. Too much competition, and larger plants may overgrow them. This is why they often succeed in places where larger plants are less dominant. Bare rock, bark, thin soil, old walls, cold ground, wet logs, shaded stones. These are places where mosses and lichens can use their special strategies. They do not need deep soil in the same way many plants do. They can live low, attach lightly or tightly, absorb water from the surface, pause during dryness, resume after wetting. Grow slowly where others cannot grow quickly. Competition is important. In fertile soil with plenty of light and water, taller plants may dominate. Grasses, herbs, shrubs, and trees can shade the ground and use resources quickly. Mosses may still live below them, but they can be outcompacted in some conditions. On hard surfaces or nutrient-poor substrates, larger rooted plants may struggle to establish. This opens space for mosses and lichens. They are specialists of edges and surfaces. Places between soil and air, between rock and weather, between bark and mist. North-facing surfaces are often associated with moss in the northern hemisphere. This is partly because they may receive less direct sunlight. Less sunlight can mean cooler temperatures and slower drying. More moisture can remain available. But the old saying that moss always grows on the north side of trees is too simple. Moss can grow on many sides of a tree if conditions are right. Local shade, bark, texture, humidity, slope, nearby vegetation, and climate all matter. In the southern hemisphere, the pattern may differ, and in dense forests, light patterns can be complex, so moss can sometimes be more common on the cooler, shadier side, but it is not a perfect compass. Nature rarely follows a rule that simple. Still, the association tells us something useful. Moss often follows moisture. If one side of a tree dries more slowly, moss may grow there more readily. If one side of a rock is shaded, it may become greener. If a wall faces away from harsh sun and wind, it may gather life. The organisms are responding to microclimate. Microclimate links the climate of a small place. A forest has a climate, but a forest floor has its own microclimate. The top of a log has one microclimate. The underside has another. A crack in a wall has another. The base of a tree has another. Mosses and lichens often live according to microclimate more than broad climate. Broad climate decides what is possible in a region. Microclimate decides what is possible on a particular surface. Humidity, temperature, light, wind, and water retention can vary sharply at small scales. A sunny stone and a shaded stone, only a meter apart, may support different life. A branch near a stream may host more lichens than a similar branch in a dry clearing. A wall under a dripping roof edge may support moss, while a drier wall beside it remains bare. Water pathways matter. Rain does not wet every surface equally. It runs down trunks, it splashes from stones, It drips from roofs, it collects at ledges, it follows cracks, it pools in depressions. It evaporates faster from exposed surfaces. Mosses and lichens often reveal these invisible pathways. A green streak down a wall may show where water regularly flows. A lichen ring on rock may show stable exposure. Moss at the base of a tree may show where water and shade meet. Living growth becomes a map of moisture history. Urban surfaces can also support mosses and lichens. Old brick walls, concrete, roof tiles, stone monuments, sidewalk cracks, drain edges, pavement shaded by buildings. Cities may seem hostile, but they contain many some are polluted, dry, or frequently disturbed. Others are surprisingly suitable. A shaded wall that receives rain and dries slowly can host moss. A stone monument may grow crustose. Roof tiles may support both. The chemistry of concrete and mortar can favor species that tolerate alkaline conditions. Urban lichens can also reflect air quality. In cleaner air, more sensitive species may appear. In polluted or nutrient-enriched environments, tolerant species dominate. This makes city lichens interesting records of environmental conditions. Even on human-made surfaces, the same basic questions apply. Can the organism attach? Is there enough light? Does moisture arrive often enough? Does the surface dry too quickly? Is the chemistry tolerable? Is disturbance low enough? If the answers are favorable, life can begin. Mosses and lichens are excellent at finding small chances. A crack, a drip line, a shaded edge, a rough patch, a stable stone, a branch with the right bark. They do not need a meadow. They do not need deep soil. They need a surface that gives them enough time, enough moisture, enough light, and enough stability. This is why old places often carry more moss and lichen, not because age alone creates them, but because time allows slow colonization. Spores arrive, fragments settle, lichen propagules, attach, dust gathers, rain repeats, drying repeats, small patches expand. A surface that remains undisturbed for years becomes available to slow life. A new wall may look clean, an old wall may become a living map. A young branch may have little growth. Older bark may hold more texture and stability. A freshly exposed rock may be bare. Over time, lichens may mark it. Then moss may find cracks. Then particles may collect. The surface becomes less empty. This slow arrival is one of the quiet themes of moss and lichen ecology. They are often early colonizers, but they are not always fast. They belong to time. They show what repeated moisture and stability can do. They turn hard surfaces into living surfaces. And they remind us that habitat does not need to be large to be meaningful. A moss cushion on a stone is a habitat. A lichen thallus on bark is a habitat. A crack in a wall is a habitat. A shaded root is a habitat. Tiny organisms use these spaces. Water is held there, spores land there, microbes live there, small invertebrates may shelter there. The surface becomes layered, physical, chemical, biological. This is why mosses and lichens love stones, bark, and shade, not because they are romantic places, but because these places provide the conditions their bodies can use: attachment, moisture, texture, stability, light, chemistry, reduced competition, a small climate near the surface. The next time you see moss on a stone or lichen on bark, it may help to ask a few quiet questions. Why here? Why this side? Why this texture? Why this color? Why this patch and not the surface beside it? The answer may involve water, shade, pH, wind, roughness, time, and chance. The organism is not only growing there, it is reading the place. It is responding to the conditions written into the surface. And once mosses and lichens settle into these places, one of their greatest challenges begins. They must survive the coming and going of water. Wet after rain, dry under sun, frozen in cold, rehydrated by fog, paused for days, active for hours. In the next scene, we will look more closely at water, drying, and survival, and how these small organisms endure a world that is often only briefly wet. Water controls the rhythm of mosses and lichens, not in the same way it controls a large tree. A tree works to keep water moving through its body. Roots absorb water from soil. Vascular tissue carries it upward. Leaves regulate water loss through stomata. The plant maintains an internal water system. Mosses and lichens live closer to the surface. They are more exposed to the air around them. Their water content can rise and fall with the environment. When the air is wet, they hydrate. When the air is dry, they dry. This kind of relationship with water is called poikilohydry. A poikilohydric organism does not maintain a constant internal water level the way many vascular plants do. Its water content changes with external conditions. Mosses and lichens are classic examples. They may be soft and active after rain, then dry, curled, pale, or brittle during dry weather, then active again when moisture returns. This can look almost like disappearance and return, but biologically, it is better understood as slowing and restarting. Dry moss may not be dead, dry lichen may not be dead. They may be in a state of very low metabolic activity, waiting for water. This ability to survive drying is called desiccation tolerance. Desiccation means severe drying. For many organisms, desiccation is dangerous. Cells depend on water for structure, chemistry, and movement of molecules. Proteins need the right environment to fold and function. Membranes need to remain organized. Enzymes need water to carry out reactions. Photosynthesis requires water. Respiration depends on hydrated cellular systems. When water is lost, cells can be damaged. Membranes may become leaky. Proteins may lose their shape. Reactive molecules may accumulate. Mechanical stress can occur as tissues shrink. For many plants, drying beyond a certain point is fatal. But many mosses and lichens have ways to tolerate it. They do not avoid drying completely. They endure it. During drying, metabolism slows down. Photosynthesis decreases or stops. Growth stops. Movement of materials slows. The organism enters a paused state. This pause can last for hours, days, weeks, or sometimes much longer, depending on the species and conditions. Then, when water returns, the cells rehydrate. Membranes reorganice. Enzymes resume activity. Photosynthesis can restart. The organism returns to active life. This is one of the most remarkable features of moss and lichen biology. They can live in fragments of time: a wet morning, a foggy hour, a rainfall, a night of dew, a period of mist. They do not always need continuous moisture. They need enough moments of moisture to repair, photosynthesize, grow, and reproduce. This makes them well suited to surfaces where water is irregular. Stone, bark, exposed soil, old walls, branches, roofs, dry tundra, desert rock, mountain slopes. Their life is often intermittent. Activity arrives with water, then fades with drying. Mosses show this very clearly. Some mosses curl their leaves when dry. This can reduce exposed surface area and protect delicate tissues. When water returns, the leaves spread again. The moss may change color. A dry moss cushion may look brownish, gray-green, or dull. After rain, it may become bright green, soft, and open. This change can happen surprisingly quickly. Within minutes or hours, rehydration can alter the appearance of the moss. The cells take up water, the tissues expand. Photosynthetic pigments become more visually apparent. The plant resumes activity. In some mosses, the recovery of photosynthesis after rewetting can be rapid, but recovery is not always effortless. Drying and rewetting can create stress. Cells must protect themselves during water loss and repair themselves after water returns. Some desiccation-tolerant mosses accumulate protective sugars and other molecules. These compounds can help stabilize membranes and proteins during drying. They can help the cell avoid collapse. They can reduce damage from oxidative stress. Oxidative stress happens when reactive oxygen species damage cellular components. During drying and rehydration, reactive molecules can become a problem. Protective compounds and repair systems help the organism survive. In simple terms, a tolerant moss does not just dry like a dead object. It dries in a controlled way. Its cells prepare for water loss. Then, when water returns, they restart. Lichens also show strong desiccation tolerance. Many lichens can dry almost completely and later resume metabolic activity. The lichen thallus changes as it dries. It may become brittle, its color may change. Its photosynthetic activity may stop. When rain, fog, or dehydrates it again, the thallus absorbs water across its surface. The phytobium can restart photosynthesis. The fungus resumes metabolic exchange. Sugars begin moving. Gas exchange resumes. The partnership becomes active. This wet-dry rhythm is central to lichen life. A lichen on a rock may be inactive during a dry afternoon, then active during a foggy night. A lichen on bark may photosynthesize after dew forms before sunrise. A desert lichen may wait through long dry periods and then become active after a brief rain. The active window may be short, but if enough of these windows occur over time, the lichen can survive and grow. Slowly, millimeter by millimeter, the timing of hydration matters. If a lichen becomes wet in darkness, photosynthesis may not occur because there is not enough light. But respiration may still use stored energy. If it becomes wet in bright light, photosynthesis can occur, but intense light and drying can also create stress. If it remains too wet for too long, gas exchange may be limited. Water fills spaces in the thallus. Carbon dioxide may diffuse more slowly, so there is a balance. Too dry, and metabolism stops. Too wet, and diffusion may be limited. Moist illuminated conditions are often ideal. A light rain followed by gentle light. Morning dew followed by sunrise. Fog with enough brightness, these are good activity windows. This balance between water and gas exchange is important. Photosynthesis needs carbon dioxide. If a thallus is saturated with water, carbon dioxide may not move into the photobionts layer efficiently. The lichen is hydrated, but not always at maximum productivity. This is why the best condition is not always simply more water. Biology often lives between extremes. Enough water to activate, enough airspace for gases, enough light for photosynthesis. Not too much heat, not too much drying. Mosses also face this balance. A moss mat can hold water very well, but if it is completely saturated, oxygen and carbon dioxide movement can change. If it is too dry, cells cannot function. If it is moist but not flooded, photosynthesis may proceed well. Different moss species are adapted to different water regimes. Some live in bogs and can tolerate constant wetness. Some live on rocks and tolerate frequent drying. Some live in forests, where the surface stays humid. Some live near streams, where splash keeps them wet. The same is true of lichens. Some are adapted to deserts, some to humid forests, some to cold tundra, some to sea cliffs, some to urban stone. Their water strategies differ, but many share the ability to pause when dry. Dew is an especially important water source in some habitats. Dew forms when surface is cool enough for water vapor in the air to condense onto them. A lichen or moss on a cool surface may receive water even when no rain falls. This can create short periods of hydration at night or early morning. Fog can also be important. Fog droplets can deposit on surfaces. Mosses and lichens can absorb this moisture. In coastal forests, mountains, and foggy regions, fog may provide significant water. For organisms living on bark or rock, fog can be as important as rain. It arrives gently, it weights surfaces without heavy impact. It can keep the air humid for hours. A lichen in fog may hydrate slowly and remain active if there is enough light. A moss cushion in fog may absorb moisture through its surface and capillary spaces. Rain is more direct. It can hydrate quickly. It can wash particles across surfaces. It can trigger moss spur movement during reproduction. It can refresh dried tissues, but heavy rain can also dislodge fragments or wash away spores. Again, water is both opportunity and force. A gentle rain activates. A strong flow may disturb. The scale matters. For a moss spore, a raindrop is large. For a tiny lichen propagule, flowing water can be a river. The small world experiences water differently from us. A drop can be an event. A film of moisture can be a pathway. A damp morning can be a growing season in miniature. Freezing adds another challenge. Some mosses and lichens tolerate cold very well. In cold environments, they may freeze while dry or hydrated. Freezing can damage cells because ice crystals can disrupt membranes and tissues, but many cold-adapted species have protective strategies. Dry tissues may be less vulnerable to freezing damage than fully hydrated tissues. Some organisms produce compounds that reduce freezing stress. Some survive by tolerating extracellular ice, meaning ice forms outside the cells rather than inside them. The details vary among species, but the general pattern is familiar. Small organisms living on exposed surfaces must tolerate changing water states, liquid ice, vapor, dryness, rehydration. They live at the edge of phase changes. This connects them back to the larger water cycle. The same water that forms clouds and rain also controls the daily activity of moss and lichens. In the sky, water changes from vapor to droplets to ice. On the forest floor, water changes a dry moss into an active plant. On bark, it changes a paused lichen into a photosynthetic partnership. On stone, it enters cracks, weights, surfaces, and allows life to continue. Water is not just background, it is the switch. The clock, the medium, the stress, the relief. When dry, a lichen may be extremely resistant to harsh conditions. It can tolerate light, cold, or heat better in a dormant state than it might while fully active. But while dry, it is not growing much. Survival is not the same as productivity. A dry lichen can endure. A hydrated lichen can work. It needs both abilities, the ability to wait and the ability to use the moment when conditions return. This is a quiet but powerful strategy. Instead of controlling the environment, the organism synchronizes with it. When water is absent, it pauses. When water arrives, it acts. This pulsed activity can make growth slow, but it allows life in places where continuous activity is impossible. Mosses use a similar strategy. A dry moss cushion may seem lifeless. Then rain falls. Within a short time, it looks green and open. Photosynthesis restarts. Water moves through the mat. Small organisms inside it become active. The moss world wakes. Later, as the air dries, the activity slows again. This cycle can repeat countless times. The moss is not failing by drying. Drying is part of its life. For many species, the ability to dry and revive is essential. Scientists study desiccation-tolerant organisms because they reveal how cells can survive extreme water loss. Understanding these mechanisms can teach us about stress biology, membrane stability, protective molecules, and the limits of life. Mosses and lichens are not only pretty surface organisms, they are models of endurance. They show that life can persist without constant comfort. But endurance has limits. If dry periods become too long, some species may decline. If temperatures become too high, damage may accumulate. If pollution changes the chemistry of the surface, sensitive lichens may disappear. If shade becomes too deep, photosynthesis may not support growth. If surfaces are disturbed too often, slow-growing colonies may not recover. Tolerance is not invincibility. It is a range of survival, a set of adaptations, a way of dealing with stress. This is important because mosses and lichens can respond to environmental change. Changes in humidity, air quality, temperature, forest cover, and land use can all affect them. A forest that becomes drier may lose some moss communities. A polluted city may lose sensitive lichens. A warming climate may shift where certain species can survive. Small organisms can be sensitive indicators of larger changes. Their slow lives record conditions over time. They do not migrate quickly. They do not escape easily. They remain on surfaces and respond. This makes their presence meaningful. A lush moss carpet suggests moisture and shade. A diverse lichen community may suggest clean air and suitable bark or rock. A dry bare surface may reveal exposure, disturbance, or unsuitable chemistry. The surface becomes a record. Water history, light history, air history, disturbance history. In this way, mosses and lichens are not only surviving their environments, they are describing them, quietly, in green cushions. Gray crusts, yellow patches, branching forms, damp mats, dry flakes. When rain returns to a mossy stone, it is easy to see only beauty. Tiny droplets, deep green color, soft texture. But behind that beauty is a set of technical processes: water absorption, capillary movement, cell rehydration, membrane repair, photosynthesis, gas exchange, metabolic restart, protective chemistry, drying tolerance, species-specific adaptation. The scene is quiet, but the biology is active. A lichen, after fog, is similar. The thallus hydrates, the photobionts receives light. Sugars are made, the fungus uses them. Water slowly evaporates. The system dries. Activity pauses, then waits. This rhythm can continue for years. A life made of openings and pauses, short active windows, and long still intervals. Mosses and lichens show that survival is not always about constant growth. Sometimes survival is about timing. Knowing how to stop, knowing how to restart, holding structure through dryness, protecting cells during stress, using brief moisture, well, turning rain, dew, and fog into moments of life. This is the science of drying and survival. It is not dramatic. It does not happen with obvious movement. It happens in cells, membranes, pigments, sugars, fungal threads, algal layers, and tiny green shoots. It happens on bark, on stone, on soil, on old walls, on forest floors. And once these small organisms hold moisture and create miniature habitats, other forms of life begin to use them. Tiny animals, microbes, fungi, nematodes, springtails, mites, and one of the most famous microscopic survivors of all, tardigrades. In the next scene, we will look inside the tiny ecosystems formed by mosses and lichens, and the small creatures that live among them. A moss cushion may look like a simple green surface, but at small scale, it is a landscape. There are tiny stems, leaf-like structures, water films, air spaces, particles of soil, fungal threads, bacteria, algae, microscopic animals, and small invertebrates moving through spaces too narrow for us to notice. A patch of moss can be a miniature ecosystem. It holds water, it traps organic matter, it creates shade, it slows airflow, it buffers changes in temperature and humidity. For tiny organisms, these small differences can be enormous. A space between two moss shoots may be a shelter. A water film may be a pathway. A droplet may be a temporary pond. A bit of decaying leaf may be food. A grain of soil may be a surface for bacteria and fungi. At human scale, the moss is small. At microbial scale, it is a forest. One of the most famous animals associated with moss is the tardigrade. Tardigrades are microscopic animals, often called water bears. They have small segmented bodies and usually 8 legs. They live in many moist environments, including mosses, lichens, soil, leaf litter, fresh water, and marine sediments. Many tardigrades feed on plant cells, algae, bacteria, or smaller organisms. Some are predators of other tiny animals. They are famous for their ability to survive extreme conditions, but in their normal lives, they are not space monsters or science fiction creatures. They are small animals living in thin films of water to move, feed, and reproduce. Many tardigrades need water around them. A moss cushion can provide that. When moss is wet, water fills small spaces between shoots. Tardigrades and other microscopic animals can move through these films. When the moss dries, some tardigrades can enter a dormant state called a time. In this state, they lose much of their body water, contract their body, and greatly reduce metabolic activity. This helps them survive drying. When water returns, they may rehydrate and become active again. This is one reason moss habitats are important to them. The moss itself dries and rehydrates. The organisms inside it may follow similar rhythms: wet and active, dry and pause, wet and active again. Tardigrades are only one part of this small world. Mosses can also host nematodes. Nematodes are tiny roundworms. Some feed on bacteria, some feed on fungi, some feed on plant material. Some are predators. There may also be rotifers, which are microscopic animals often found in water films. Like tardigrades, some rotifers can survive drying. Springtails may live among mosses too. Springtails are tiny arthropods. They often feed on fungi, decaying matter, algae, or microbes. They help break down organic material and move nutrients through small ecosystems. Mites can also live in moss and lichen habitats. Some graze on fungi or algae. Some are predators. Some feed on decaying material. The moss mat becomes a layered community. Plants, fungi, bacteria, algae, tiny animals, organic particles, water, air. Each part affects the others. A lichen can also host small life. Its surface may contain bacteria and fungi. Small invertebrates may graze on parts of it. Tiny organisms may shelter in cracks and lobes. A foliose lichen with lifted edges can create small spaces beneath its thallus. A fruticose lichen can create a branching structure where moisture and particles collect. A crustose lichen may seem flat, but even its surface can support microbial life. Lichens themselves are already partnerships, but they can also become habitats for other organisms. This makes them part of a wider biological web. The organisms living in mosses and lichens are often connected to decomposition. Decomposition is the breakdown of dead organic material. Leaves fall, wood decays, pollen settles, dust gathers. Tiny fragments of plants and fungi become food for microbes and small animals. Bacteria and fungi break down complex materials. Small invertebrates graze, shred, and move particles. Nutrients are released. Carbon moves through the system. Even in a tiny moss patch, the basic processes of ecology are present. Energy, flow, nutrient cycling, predation, grazing, shelter, competition, dormancy, reproduction. The scale is small, but the principles are the same. A moss cushion can also moderate the environment for its inhabitants. It may stay humid longer than bare stone. It may reduce direct sunlight. It may protect tiny animals from wind. It may hold water after rain. It may trap food particles. These conditions make survival possible for organisms that would dry out quickly on an exposed surface. For microscopic life, moisture is often the difference between activity and dormancy. A dry surface is a pause. A wet surface is an opening. When rain falls, the moss world changes. Cells rehydrate. Bacteria become more active. Fungal hyphae continue their work. Tardigrades may move again. Rotifers may resume feeding. Springtails may explore damp spaces. Nutrients dissolve and move in water films. The moss cushion becomes active at many levels at once. The surface looks quiet, but the small world has awakened. This is why mosses and lichens are more than decoration. They create conditions. They hold moisture. They catch particles. They provide surfaces. They support communities. They are habitat builders at miniature scale. A stone with moss is not just a stone with green on it. It is a place where water remains longer, where spores may land, where microbes may feed, where tiny animals may wade through dryness, where life uses small shelter. A branch with lichen is not just a branch with pale patches. It is a surface where symbiosis, chemistry, air, light, and microscopic life meet. The more closely we look, the less empty these surfaces become. A forest floor is not only leaves and soil, it is moss cushions, lichen patches, fungal threads, microbial films, tiny animals, water held in small spaces, and a slow exchange of matter between living and non-living things. This small ecology matters because large ecosystems are built from small processes. Soil formation begins with tiny changes. Decomposition depends on microbes and small animals. Moisture retention depends on surfaces and structure. Nutrient cycling depends on organisms that are often unseen. Mosses and lichens participate in all of this. Quietly, close to the ground, close to bark, close to stone. They do not dominate by height. They contribute by persistence, by surface, by shelter, by holding water where it might otherwise disappear, by giving small organisms a place to live. And as these small habitats persist, they begin to change the surfaces beneath them. Stone becomes weathered, dust becomes trapped. Organic matter accumulates, moisture remains a little longer. The first hints of soil can begin, and in the final part of our journey, we will return to that slow transformation. How mosses, lichens, water, and time help turn bare surfaces into living ground. Bare stone may seem permanent, hard, silent, unchanging, but even stone is part of slow biological time. A rock surface exposed to air, water, sunlight, freezing, heating, wind, dust, and living organisms begins to change. The change may be extremely slow, too slow to watch directly, but over seasons and years, the surface is altered. Cracks widen, minerals loosen, particles collect, water enters tiny spaces, organic matter gathers in small depressions, and eventually, places that were once bare can begin to hold life. Lichens are often among the early organisms on exposed rock. The crustose lichen can attach tightly to the surface. Its fungal threads grow close against the marine surface. The lichen absorbs water from rain, fog, and dew. It expands and contracts as it waits and dries. It produces chemical compounds, including organic acids, that can interact with minerals. These processes do not break rock apart suddenly. They work slowly, physically, chemically, repeatedly. The lichen is not a hammer. It is more like a patient contact between biology and stone. Over time, this contact can contribute to weathering. Weathering is the breakdown or alteration of rock at Earth's surface. Physical weathering includes processes like freezing and thawing, heating and cooling, abrasion, and cracking. Chemical weathering changes minerals through reactions with water, acids, oxygen, or other substances. Biological weathering happens when living organisms contribute to these changes. Lichens can take part in biological weathering, so can mosses, roots, microbes, fungi, and many other organisms. A lichen on stone may trap dust, it may hold moisture, it may release compounds. When parts of the lichen die, small amounts of organic matter remain. Wind brings more particles, rain moves them into cracks. Tiny fragments accumulate. The surface becomes less bare. Mosses may then establish in small pockets where moisture and particles last longer. Moss does not need deep soil to begin. A crack with a little dust and dampness may be enough. A shaded ledge may hold water. A rough place on stone may catch spores. Once moss begins growing, it can trap even more particles. Its tiny shoots slow water. TS mat holds moisture. Dead moss material adds organic matter. Microbes and small animals contribute to decomposition. The patch becomes a small factory of surface change. Again, the process is slow, but slowness is not absence. In ecology, many important processes are gradual. Soil formation is one of them. Soil is not just broken rock. It is a mixture of mineral particles, organic matter, water, air, and living organisms. It forms through the interaction of geology, climate, organisms, topography, and time. Mosses and lichens are only part of that story, but they can be important at the beginning, especially on bare or disturbed surfaces. They help hold water, they trap particles, they add organic matter, they create tiny habitats, they make the surface more suitable for other life. In primary succession, life begins on a surface where little or no soil exists. This might happen on fresh lava, exposed rock after glaciers retreat, landslide surfaces, or newly uncovered stone. Lichens, microbes, and mosses can be among early colonizers. They do not create a forest by themselves, but they help begin the conditions from which more complex communities may eventually develop. First a film, then a crust, then small patches, then more trapped particles, then moss, then tiny soil pockets. Then perhaps grasses, herbs, shrubs, and eventually larger plants, depending on climate and place. This is not guaranteed. Every landscape follows its own path, but the principle is important. Small organisms can prepare the way. Lichens and mosses can also influence soil that already exists. On forest floors, moss mats can reduce erosion. They soften the impact of raindrops. They slow surface runoff. They help hold moisture near the ground. They provide shelter for microbes and tiny animals. They can influence soil temperature and humidity. In wetlands and bogs, some mosses play even larger roles. Sphagnum moss is especially important. It can hold large amounts of water. It can acidify its environment. It can slow decomposition. In waterlogged, oxygen conditions, dead sphagnum can accumulate as peat. Over long periods, peatlands can store large amounts of carbon. This means that some mosses are not only small plants on the surface, they are landscape builders, hydrology changers, ecosystem engineers in quiet green form. Not all moss is sphagnum. Not all moss creates peat, but the example shows what mosses can do when conditions allow. Small bodies can have large effects when they are abundant and persistent. Lichens also contribute to ecosystems in many ways. Some provide food for animals. Reindeer and caribou eat certain fruticose lichens in northern regions, especially during winter. Small invertebrates may graze on lichens. Birds may use lichens in nests. Nitrogen-fixing lichens can add usable nitrogen to some environments. Lichens can also influence moisture and surface chemistry. They are not just color on bark. They are participants in ecological exchange. Mosses provide shelter and moisture for tiny organisms. They help create they influence water flow. They protect soil. They take part in carbon cycling. They create green continuity in shaded and wet places. Together, mosses and lichens make surfaces more alive. A stone becomes more than stone. A branch becomes more than bark. A wall becomes more than mineral and water. A forest floor becomes a layered system of leaves, fungi, roots, microbes, moss, lichen, water, and time. This has been the quiet theme of our journey. Small life can be structurally simple and ecologically important. A moss does not need flowers to matter. A lichen does not need roots to belong. A tiny organism does not need speed to shape a place. Life can work slowly, close to the ground, close to moisture, close to stone, close to the bark of trees. Mosses and lichens are often overlooked because they do not move in ways we notice. They do not call out. They do not bloom brightly for a week and vanish. They do not grow tall above us. They remain low, patient, textured, waiting for rain, waiting for mist, waiting for dew. When water returns, their hidden activity resumes. Moss cells rehydrate. Lichen photobians begin photosynthesis. Fungal threads continue their slow architecture. Tiny animals move through water films. Spores wait, release, land, or germinate. Microbes feed. Organic matter softens. Mineral surfaces change. The forest floor breathes in small ways. A green patch on a stone may contain many stories at once. The story of ancient land plants. The story of symbiosis. The story of drying and survival. The story of spores and capsules. The story of fungi and algae living together. The story of water held between tiny structures. The story of soil beginning. The story of small animals finding shelter. The story of time written close to the surface. And perhaps this is why moss and lichens feel so peaceful to look at. They remind us of life without hurry, growth without noise, change without sharp edges. They show that the living world is not only dramatic, it is also patient. It can be soft, it can be crusted onto stone, it can be a pale patch on bark, it can be a green cushion holding rain. It can wait through dryness, it can wake with mist. It can persist through seasons almost silently. Tonight, we began beneath the trees, at the level of stones, bark, moisture, and green silence. We learned that moss is a small, non-vascular plant, that it lives without true roots, that it anchors with rhizoids, absorbs water across its body, and reproduces with spores. We followed its capsules, its gametophyte, and its sporophyte. We learned that lichens are not moss, but living partnerships between fungi and photosynthetic partners. We looked at symbiosis, algae, cyanobacteria, fungal hyphae, and the quiet structure of the thallus. We explored why mosses and lichens grow on stones, bark, shaded soil, old walls, and damp surfaces. We followed their wet and dry rhythms, their ability to pause, their ability to restart. We looked into the tiny ecosystems they create for microbes, springtails, mites, nematodes, rotifers, and tardigrades. And finally, we returned to soil, to the slow making of living ground. All of this can happen in places easy to pass by. The side of a stone, the base of a tree, the edge of a path, the shaded surface of an old wall, a fallen branch after rain, a patch of green no larger than a hand. The small world is not separate from the large one. It supports it, it begins it, it softens it, it records it. So the next time you see moss or lichen, you may notice more than color. You may see a plant without true roots, a fungus living with light, a surface holding water, a slow conversation between biology and stone, a tiny habitat, a quiet archive of moisture, air, time, and life. There is no need to remember every detail. You can let the names drift away if you like. Bryophyte, rhizoid, gametophyte, mycobiont, photobiont, thallus, symbiosis, poikilohedry, desiccation, tolerance. They are useful words, but the deeper idea is simple. Life can be small and still be complete. Life can be slow and still be powerful. Life can wait and return and continue. Thank you for spending this calm journey with Midnight Science. If you are still awake, you can let the forest floor stay in your mind for a little while. A damp stone, a green cushion of moss, a pale lichen on bark, a few drops of water. Mist between the trees, tiny lives moving where the eye cannot follow. Let the image become soft. Let the details settle. And let this small green world drift quietly into the background. Good night.